It started with my parents' investment in a set of encyclopedias. I was lucky to have people who encouraged me to find that kind of knowledge. Other people I went to school with were not so lucky. No one talked that much to them about learning, about the power of education, about how reading can give you power and an advantage. I grew up in a culture that put more store in countless other things besides reading. That is one of the dark sides of Appalachia. And I think it wasn't just because of the place, but also because of the time, a time like now, when people put more store in wealth and vanity than they do in ethics and learning. One reason my parents were different is because my maternal grandfather couldn't read. He passed away 4 years ago at the age of 85, and he never did learn to read. He signed documents with his mark, which was a simple, shaky X. My grandfather, known as Papa to us, didn't go all his life without learning to read because he was stupid, but because of circumstances and shame. Raised by a single mother with 4 other children, his father died when he was 5. Papa had to quit school in the 4th grade to go make a living. He worked in a sawmill as a young boy, then entered the mines when he was 16. Shortly thereafter, he was sent to Africa to serve in World War II. Just out of the war, he was rewarded with a job in the deep mines in Leslie County, Kentucky. He was there the day the whole roof caved in, killing 4 of his co-workers and crushing him beneath a boulder the size of a car. They dragged him out with his right leg hanging on by 1 cord of muscle, and the doctor amputated it without my grandfather ever losing consciousness. After only 6 months of convalescence, he went back into the mines and worked there for 20 more years. When I asked him why he didn't draw a check and not go back into the mines, he said, "I had a family to support, children to feed, I like to work." But he never got a chance to learn how to read. By the time he was able to slow down enough to not be working around the clock, he was too ashamed to ask anyone to teach him to read, so he went on without words. But he made sure that his children not only read, but were readers. He once heard a man on the radio quote a line by Abraham Lincoln that became his favorite. "The man who does not read has no advantage on the man who cannot read." So my grandfather drilled into his children's heads that they had to get an education. They had to know words and sentences and books. And my mother and father passed that on to me. Nobody was more proud than my grandfather when my first book was published. He couldn't read it, but he could sit and run his hand over the page, could draw its scent up into his Cherokee nose. He told everyone who would listen about my book. "My grandson's a writer," he'd say. "He writes books." Once my books were published and I started going out on the road, I encountered a lot of people who made fun of where I was from. They thought they were being clever when they asked me if people back home wore shoes, if we had indoor plumbing. Only a couple of years ago, one man asked me in all seriousness if anyone in Kentucky had the internet. Another woman asked me if I'd ever heard of Johnny Carson, as if we were so cut off from society that we didn't even know who celebrities were. And then one day, a man asked me if my grandparents could read. I told him that yes, of course, everybody I knew back home could read. I felt very guilty later about lying. It wasn't that I was ashamed of my grandfather, it was that I was being protective of him. What I should have said was that there are people all over the country and world who can't read, who never had the opportunity or who were trying their best to learn how to read. I should have told him that it was nothing to be ashamed of, that it was instead something to change. But it was too complicated, and I didn't want him to get the wrong idea about my grandfather and about where I was from, because there was no way I could stand there and explain to him about my grandfather's dignity or intelligence or his wisdom. People who would ask such a question would never understand that kind of wisdom anyway. I've met more good people than bad while on the road, but it's the people who ask the stupid questions or say the insulting things about Appalachia that stick with us the most. I don't feel personally attacked so much as I feel as if my people, my home, are being attacked. I feel as if my home is under fire. There's something in us that makes us want to always defend our homes, whatever we think of as home. For me, when I think of home, I always think of this whole region and all the people in it. Very often, I don't even agree with the majority of people in the region. There are plenty of people in my hometown who won't even speak to me because of my stance on things like mountaintop removal, inequality, and immigration and the like. But that does not lessen my love for the place. No matter the differences, nothing has been able to chip away at the hold Appalachia, home, has over me. That's why I keep coming back. That's why all of you are part of an organization like FAHE, because it is of service, because it provides the most important thing, a home. As Appalachians, we'll always be seen as the other. And I know that many of you can relate to that too, whether it's because you're Appalachian or black or gay or different in whatever way. The more prejudice I have faced because of where I'm from, the prouder I have become of that place. Once, when I was on the road, a woman asked me why I loved Appalachia so much. I said, because when your home is a place you have to defend all the time, that makes you love it that much more. I didn't even know that was true until I said it. I had never had to articulate it until that moment, but then I knew that it was absolutely true. So I celebrate this place because I want everyone to know of its dignity. I want everyone to know of its joys and sorrows. I want everyone to know it not as a purely good place, nor a purely bad place, but a complex place. A place where people live and love and fight and die, just like everywhere else in the world. With all the expressions of admiration I've been spouting here, I want to tell you that I do not mean to romanticize the place, for it's a place of huge problems, and I believe that some of them are self-imposed. Yes, environmental industries are draining us dry. Yes, the media don't understand us and paint us in the least attractive light possible. Yes, there's prejudice against anything that sniffs at being the other in this country, with Appalachia being one of America's loudest beating hearts of darkness. But as Appalachians, we are to blame too, and it's time we took hold of that if we're going to start fixing things. Appalachia has always been a microcosm of America, a sort of melting pot of all that is best and worst about us. So of course we have a drug problem, as there's a drug problem throughout the nation, and the economy is in sad shape, as it is everywhere. And of course we've grown apathetic, since apathy is a disease eating up the world. But most of all, we have an education problem, just as the rest of the nation is. Sometimes it seems as if we've forgotten that education is the key to everything. Often, it even seems as if our nation has become one in which it is deemed cool to be dumb. Look at what's on our television sets and bestseller lists and music charts these days. In short, things that don't make us think so much as just entertain us. Education is the way to fight poverty and apathy, and even things as huge as corporations who have all the rights of individuals but none of the responsibilities. And I believe that the other key to fighting things like poverty and apathy and even rogue corporations is compassion. Together, we can identify the problems and come up with the solutions instead of taking the easy way out and simply complaining about the rough road we've been given to hoe. We can learn more about ourselves while also helping others. Despite all the problems, mainly in opposition to change, that I see in the region, I still celebrate my home. I hold its people in high esteem, even when I disagree with them. But what I'm talking about is at the root of the problems facing the region today. Because too many of us in Appalachia have kept our eyes, minds, and hearts shut for too long. We've shunned education and change. We can no longer do that if we want to survive as a culture. The mountains are in our hands, and with that knowledge, I come to you today with a reminder that you are fighting the good fight, and as a reminder that we must continue to stand up against injustice, even if it sometimes feels as if we aren't making any headway. This injustice might be as intimate as a person being torn down by someone calling them a stupid hillbilly or trash, or any other ethnic, racial, sexual, and/or class epithet. or the injustice may be as large scale as a mountain being torn down, so that an industry can get to coal in the cheapest and fastest way possible, no matter the harm it causes to the land and the people. We have to stand up for what is right every single day. As Appalachians, we have one major thing in our favor, the element of surprise. The whole world has underestimated us so long that we have every opportunity to surprise them with our intelligence and open-mindedness. The first line of the poem I read earlier goes, "They don't expect much out of girls raised on Double Creek." What I'm saying there is that the rest of the world doesn't expect much out of Appalachians. They expect us to mine their coal and make their moonshine and be their entertainment and not much else. But we are more than that. Because we have this element of surprise, we are even more powerful than we might have first thought. And it all goes back to what I was saying earlier about that strength in numbers, even if that strength is only found in a small group of committed citizens like yourself. Perhaps the number is not so much a reflection of how many people are involved, but how strong those people are. So thank you for being people who make the concept of home a visceral thing for people throughout this region every single day, and for fighting the good fight. Thanks.